Hi, everybody. Week 6, can you believe it? We're over the halfway mark already. My goodness. So your ticket in the door this week is to take a look at, there is a PDF of some 4th grade assessment data underneath the class 6 or week 6 information in the stream in Google Classroom. So just take a look through. You don't have to do anything formal, but just take a look through for some initial impressions. Go ahead and pause and just take a look. So our agenda for this week is to talk about progress monitoring and ongoing data collection. And the whole point of doing that is to then talk about data-driven action planning. This is a huge piece of what a literacy coach does. Our class per se is a little bit shorter this week because you've got work time built in for the assignment due next week, the data analysis and action plan. So our learning targets this week, I can determine how progress monitoring fits into data analysis and action planning. And I can use my data analysis to create meaningful action plans. Makes sense, right? So let's talk about progress monitoring and ongoing data collection. Before we go into that, I want you to kind of warm up your brains a little bit and do some brainstorming. Think about what is progress monitoring. It's kind of one of those phrases that people throw around assuming that everybody knows what it is. What's it used for, and what does it look like? So I want you to just pause. You don't even necessarily have to write anything down unless you'd like to, but just pause for a moment and kind of brainstorm a little bit. So if we want to talk about like a formal definition of progress monitoring, this would be it right here. It's taken from RTI for Success. Really the whole purpose of progress monitoring is to assess student performance, right? But we want to really look at rate of improvement or responsiveness to instruction. That could even be responsiveness to intervention, and evaluate the effectiveness of instruction, right? So it can be implemented with individual students or an entire class. So let's think about what that means. Progress monitoring to quantify a student rate of improvement. We assume students are improving if they're learning, right? But we have to quantify that. We have to put data to that. So progress monitoring helps us see exactly how much students are growing and where. It also shows us how they're responding to instruction or intervention. So this means how are they responding to specific instructional strategies that you're using, which can then help you further plan and adjust your instructional practices. And then finally, evaluate the effectiveness of instruction. So overall, is your instruction actually helping the student to grow? So really what this is, it's ongoing assessment. It has to happen at regular, predetermined intervals. So we might have assessments pop up. We just want to see where our students are at. But progress monitoring, that's got to be pre-planned. And you have to decide at what intervals are you going to monitor your students' progress and for what purpose. Progress monitoring is also not nearly as large as other assessments might be, because they're targeted. They focus on one specific skill or one specific standard. You can't assess a whole lot of stuff at one time and really be able to dig into whether or not students are growing or not. You have to be much more targeted, and that's what progress monitoring is for. And again, the purpose is to monitor growth around that particular skill, or where they are in that trajectory to meet the standard, or again, the effectiveness of intervention. So really, it's just ongoing assessment that is small, that is purposeful and targeted, and is used to help you determine whether or not students are learning. So, for example, some that hopefully you are familiar with, if you wanted to monitor all students' reading comprehension, you could do things like the SRI 3 times a year. Lots of people, lots of districts do that, fall, mid, and spring. So you might then use that data that you get to look at student groupings or adjust student groupings across the year for guided reading or for intervention if they go to AIS or something. Another example, I know some districts do the DRA 2+ every 6 weeks, and that is also used to determine if interventions are working or if instruction is working. It helps you monitor very specific growth that students are making, and then you can make decisions on what instruction you want to change. So think about how powerful that is. If you are assessing students every 6 weeks and then adjusting your instruction accordingly, students are very often going to get the instruction that they need, right? I want you to think about examples of progress monitoring that you use or have seen. There's no purpose in progress monitoring if something isn't done with that data. So think about as many examples as you can that you use or have seen. Okay, let's talk about data-driven action planning. So we're going to go back to that packet of student data. And we're going to analyze just one of the students. So the packet has just 4 students' data in it. And we're going to use that DDD process that we talked about last week. I'm again giving you math data. Remember, I am very well aware you are training to be literacy specialists, but I cannot tell you how often I analyze math data, probably just as much as I did literacy data. The literacy specialist is leading this work with teachers, so the content is almost irrelevant. It's this process. And for our purposes, because this is online, because we have a limited amount of time, math is just a little bit quicker to assess. So let me pull up, oops. Oh, for crying out loud. Let me, what, I had it pulled up already. Okay. Oh, nope, wrong one. Man, I can't get it together, huh? Okay, so this should look like the packet that you have, or file, I should say, that you have. The key is first. So the standards that are being assessed here, you can tell all have to do with multiplication, multi-digit times 1 digit. So students have to use the standard algorithm, which is, you know, the regular formula. They have to be able to read a word problem and know what math to do, and then obviously solve it. They have to know how to use an array and an area model. So in this case, they only used an array, and that's what the teacher told them to do. But they had to use an array and then the standard algorithm. And they had to know prime and composite, what numbers they are, and factors. And then here is where they're using the area model to do multi-digit, 2 by 2 digit multiplication. Okay, so let's just look at Vita's work here. If we were going to go through that DDD process, first of all, I already ruined it because I gave you the data. You know that the first thing you're supposed to do is predict, right? So knowing what standards are being assessed, I might predict that students will struggle with the word problem because they might not know exactly what's being asked of them. So they might do the wrong math because of the reading comprehension. I might also predict that students might confuse prime and composite, because that's kind of hard to remember if you think about it. And maybe some students would struggle with the 2-digit by 2-digit numbers because of having to line up, you know, using place value. Those are just my predictions. You might have different ones. So we know that after we make those predictions, we have to go visual. So the way that we do that is stoplight, highlight. So in Vita's work, unfortunately I can't do this actually on the computer, but if I were to go through and highlight in green the things that she totally nailed, yellow are the things that are kind of close, might have made a small error, and then red or pink is she totally does not have that concept. So if we're going to look right here, if we look at this first one, now you do have the key in case you don't want to do the math in your head. If we look at, here, let's look at, so the 2 answers, you can see, first of all, they had to make sure they carried. So 14,088 and 11,753. Back down to Vita. Oh my goodness. So she has the answers correct, so that's great. I would actually highlight those in green. But then I'm going to go through and make sure, was it luck or did she actually get it? So I'm going to do this multiplication and see, okay, she gets carrying and she's got them lined up well. I would highlight that in green. Same with this one. Totally understands carrying. She's got them lined up beautifully. I would highlight that in green. That makes sense, right? Now, if the student didn't line them up properly or made a mistake because of carrying in the wrong place, I would say that would be yellow. They know to carry, but they might have made a mistake. Okay? So the second one, first of all, the fact that she underlined key facts or key details is fantastic. I would highlight just the fact that she underlined. That's a strategy we teach 4th graders. Then she multiplied the correct numbers. She did the multiplication correct. So I would highlight that in green, I would highlight this in green, but then the fact that she wrote it in a sentence, the farm planted 4,820 plants. She understands that she's answering this question, that it doesn't just end with this answer, right? So I would highlight this in green, that's a big deal. Hopefully you're with me so far. Now I'm going to go down to the next two. So if you're not familiar with an array, that is a strategy that is taught in 3rd, 4th, 5th grade. I would suggest going to the standards, the next generation math standards, because what the standards do beautifully actually is describe what all of these different strategies are and give you examples. The whole right-hand column of each grade level standards will do that for you. So to look up at the key, am I on the second one? Yep. So 27 divided by 5. So you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. She put 5 in a row, and so rows of 5, and she's going to make circles until she gets to 27. So visually, she can see that 27 divided by 5 is going to give her 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns. And then there are 2 left over, so that's a remainder. So 5 remainder 2, and then she will check it with the correct, the standard algorithm. Make sense? So 32 divided by 6, she puts 6 in a row and gets up to 32. So she, again, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 columns, so that's 5 remainder 2. There are 2 by themselves. Okay? So going back down to Vita's work. So let's look at her first array. She did that well, and she even circled the remainder to remind herself. I would highlight that in green because that's a great little strategy to help her remember remainders, because that can be tricky. This one too, she did that beautifully. So that she gets the arrays, she gets the remainders. Now, this is erased. I know it looks faded. She erased it. She started writing the equation. She erased it and then realized she had to do the array, and then she did it over here. But let's look at this. First of all, it's not complete, but look at what she's lining up. So it looks like she did 5 times 2 is 10, but she put a 10, 2 digits, under just 1 digit. So I don't think she quite has that standard algorithm for division. She understands the concept right here, but she does not have the standard algorithm. And she also didn't do it for this one. So this I would highlight. I might highlight this right here in yellow because she knows that it goes from this format to this format, but the rest I would say is pink because I don't really know if she can do it or not. She didn't even attempt it down here. Okay? Next, prime and composite and factors. So let's go back up here. In this one, so they were given a number like 9, then they had to write multiplication sentences. 1 times 9, 3 times 3, write what the factors are, and then prime or composite. Okay? I'm not going to lie, prime and composite, not one of my fortes. So she gets prime and composite. Now let's look. 9, she's got the 3 times 3 and the 1 times 9, and she's got those factors. She's got it there. 12, she has 2 times 6. Now it looks like she's trying to write factors. She's got 1, comma, a blank, comma, 12. This is not a multiplication sentence, right? These are factors. But she also doesn't have the rest of the multiplication sentences. There should be 3 times 4, 12 times 1, right? So this, I would say, is a yellow because she gets what factors are, and she writes the correct ones over here. But she didn't finish this. And now 19, she's got 1 and 19. Okay, but that's not a multiplication sentence, right? And then the factors, we can assume that she meant to write a 9 here, so 1 and 19, and then that's prime. So this is a little tricky. This is another example of how in one problem or in one piece of work you can have multiple colors. She gets prime and composite. She's got it with the 9. I wonder if, oh, I'm making an inference. I'm not going to do it yet. We're just going visual. Okay, and then the last one is an area model. If you're not familiar, an area model, you make a square, and it can be used for other digits, but typically they use it for 2 by 2 digits or 2 by 1. So 26 is 20 plus 6. 43 is 40 plus 3. They do this because the multiplying is way easier. 20 times 40, they know that they just do the 4 times 2 and carry the zeros. So they then multiply 40 times 6, that's right here. Then 20 times 3 is here. 6 times 3 is here. And then they add them all up, and they get a total answer. So she understands how to use this strategy because she's got it complete here. And wait a minute. Oh yeah, man, my math in my head wasn't working for a minute. I was confused by down here. So this one is correct. This one is hard to read. So she's got the 10 plus 7 for 17, the 50 plus 5. Did I say times? I meant plus. 50 plus 5 for 55. And then she did the multiplication. She lined it up, and she got the right answer. It was correct. It was just cut off. 935. Oops. Did I pass her already? This actually is not the correct answer. I would have to go back and see. So, 4, 5, 6. So there's something missing. 40 times 20. Oh, this should be 60. 20 times 3 is 60. And that's where her error lies. So that is why this is incorrect. So this right here would be yellow. And I would highlight this in yellow. She gets all of this, so that's green. But it is due to a computation error here, which is why she got it wrong here. Does that make sense? So now I can go and make my inferences. So the inference I was just going to make, what was it? Oh, for this one, I was thinking, well, look at what she got incorrect or not complete are the 2-digit numbers. So I'm thinking she gets her multiplication sentences and factors through like 1 through 9. But once it goes, maybe even 10, but once it goes to double digits is where she struggles. So that could be an inference I'd make. Here, my inference is that she just doesn't have the standard algorithm. She doesn't get the steps just yet. She knows how to start it, and she understands like bringing down the 7, but she's not confident enough to see it through to check her work, and she didn't even attempt it here. And for this one, I almost wonder if she got this wrong because she was rushing. I know that's hard to say, but since everything else is correct, that could be a potential inference, right? Okay, so let me go back to here. And let's talk about our findings and what we're going to do with them. So the pages are numbered by exit ticket. So that first one, all strings, right? Multiplying using knowledge of place value. She did that well. And then understanding how to answer word problems. The second one, she can use an array to divide, but unsure of the standard algorithm for division. The third one, she gets prime versus composite, but there's some confusion between factors and multiplication sentences. And you could even add that observation about maybe single versus double digit numbers. And then the last one, she can use an area model to multiply 2 by 2 digit numbers, but she did get a little confused around the standard algorithm when the bottom had 2 digits. There was a tiny bit of that confusion. All makes sense, right? Hopefully. So what? Why would I do this? Well, the whole purpose of doing this kind of progress monitoring is to use that data to create an action plan for VITA. So she could definitely benefit from instruction or even a little intervention on factors and multiplication sentences, the standard algorithm for multiplication of 2 2-digit numbers, but that one computation error could have been rushing, so that wouldn't be a priority for me. And then the third, the standard algorithm for division. Makes sense, right? Those 3 outcomes came from our data analysis. So if I'm going to now create an action plan for VITA, The first thing that's so important is to only choose one skill to focus on. If you want to create any kind of action plan, especially for students with multiple needs, how overwhelming is it for you, the teacher, to address all those needs, but then for the student to know that they have to work on so many different things. You have to just choose one skill to focus on. Then you've got to figure out, well, what instructional strategies am I going to use to work on that skill? And with that information, you're going to pull from what you know about the student, what their learning style is, what they do succeed with. Then you're going to determine the length or the structure of the intervention. So this can mean what time of day is this happening? Is it going to be part of your math block? Is she going to be pulled out one-on-one? Is she going to be pulled in a small group? Is it going to happen 10 minutes every day, 20 minutes every other day? That all depends on the severity of the need and the structure of your classroom. Then you're going to determine the progress monitoring tools you're going to use and when they're going to be used. So now in this case, you could use exit tickets as a progress monitoring tool, right? It's already developed. Why recreate the wheel? But you've got to figure out when. Is it, and that's going to depend on what your intervention is structured like. If you're going to meet every day, you might progress monitor every 3 days. If you're meeting 2 or 3 times a week, you might progress monitor once a week. And then you're going to note the date at which to analyze data again and adjust the intervention. So interventions are not meant to be permanent. You can't have a student in an intervention forever. An intervention is meant to kind of help get the child back up to par, back up to grade level without any help. That's the whole purpose. So you might say after a month, after 2 months, after 8 weeks, after 6 weeks. That at that time, you're going to revisit all the data you've collected and see whether or not that intervention has been working. Okay, so thinking about VITA, let's say we chose to focus on the standard algorithm for multiplication of two two-digit numbers. That might not be the first one I would pick, but sometimes people like to pick the ones that are really close, like the yellows, because students are going to see success quickly. I love that idea. I think what it depends on is what the student is struggling with. If it's something so foundational that's going to keep holding them back, I would work on that one first. But for VITA, nothing was like significantly holding her back. So this would be a smart one to start with. So then you're going to determine what strategies you're going to use, right? Well, we saw that she has a strength in 4 times 1-digit numbers, right? So we're going to use that strength. We're going to model, especially because of using place value. Got to use modeling. And then some guided practice. Those sound meaningful, right? Then determine the length of intervention. I would say small group instruction 3 times a week for 3 weeks. There probably are other students in the class that struggle with the same thing. So that's why small group is probably the best. Progress monitoring tools, exit tickets after every single small group instruction, which you'd probably be doing anyway, and then track each exit ticket for those 3 weeks. So you'd end up with 9 data points. That's a lot to make a judgment then, right? Then you're going to use that data to determine next steps. Did the intervention work? Does she not need an intervention anymore? Or do you need a different intervention because she doesn't get it yet? Does that process make sense, I hope? What I want you to do now is jigsaw the remaining, there are 3 more 4th graders in that packet. You're going to go through that process, that data-driven dialogue process, determine one area of focus. After you go through, you make your prediction, you stop by highlight, you observe, and then you infer. And the note catchers that we used last week, I included that again in the materials for this week because you can use that again. So go through that process and then pick just one area to focus on for your one student. Determine instructional strategies for the intervention. Determine the length and structure of the intervention. And then we'll progress monitoring tools and when. Just like I just showed you in the example, okay? So make sure you pause the video and do that work. Okay, so a couple of things that are important to remember. One is that we have to collect meaningful data in an ongoing manner. Meaningful is important here. We have to make sure we're collecting data that we can actually use. Not all data is useful. Not all data is truly meaningful. It has to be data coming from targeted, very specific progress monitoring tools. And it also has to be ongoing. If we're not monitoring progress in shorter intervals, we're going to miss opportunities to correct misunderstandings. We have to analyze data without bias and with the standards in mind. So that's why going through that DDD process and predicting first is so important. When you make your predictions, you're actually getting your biases out, so they're not going to really impact your analysis. We have to use the data to make informed instructional decisions. I was going to say frustrated. It makes me sad when I hear teachers say, well, none of my students got this, or most of my students are struggling with this. That's never the case. Making blanket statements is dangerous because that means you're ignoring some students' needs, or you're ignoring kids who are far surpassed and really should be challenged. So we have to use data to make informed instructional decisions. And then finally, we have to create action plans that involve ongoing assessment. We can't wait until the end of an 8-week intervention or the end of a 6-week unit. That's too far away. That's too long for misunderstandings to be happening. So how does all of this relate to instructional coaching? Well, I kind of already alluded. You're going to lead this work with teachers. You are going to take them through diving deep into that student level data and using it to make these action plans. You can then support the teacher throughout the action plans. You can help them with additional instructional strategies. Sometimes as teachers we get stuck. We keep using what we know and are comfortable with. Sometimes we need to hear another suggestion. Sometimes we need to help teachers with the progress monitoring tools. If you don't have something easily prepared like an exit ticket, you might have to find it or create it for the teacher to help them a little bit. You might have to help the teacher analyze without bias, because that's hard to do, and you might have to remind teachers of how to do that. So really, you truly are a coach in this process. You are coaching teachers through doing this work. Let's revisit the learning targets. I can determine how progress monitoring fits into data analysis and action planning. Hopefully you see a really clear connection that progress monitoring has to be a part of any kind of action planning, because you have to measure whether or not it's working. And then I can use my data analysis to create meaningful action plans. You did that this week in the Jigsaw, and we did it together when I modeled it, and this is ultimately what you're doing again in your assignment. So hopefully you feel pretty confident with these 2 learning targets.